Hi everybody, this is Jerry Kroth, back again. I'm here to talk to you about the road to dystopia, but it requires a background, so get ready. About a year ago, I made a video called The Coronavirus and Global Economic Collapse. This was loaded with 23 experts who had said, we're going down the drain. I put that all together, but I did it with under duress because I didn't want this to be true. And so I said, okay, I'm going to come back a year from now, in 2021, and see if all these predictions came true. Well, I made a video which was called The Great Depression That Never Happened. I said, it's time for everybody to apologize because they made predictions, 23 professors, economists, pundits, investors, including me, who said this was coming. And I said to them, they never apologized, but you deserve an apology for making an incorrect prediction. Some of those predictions were 2 years old. They said the European Union's going down. Well, I made that video and I put it up, and I thought, I'm not going to spoil the experience. It's good news. We didn't have a global depression. And I thought, well, you didn't really tell the whole story. A couple of you subscribers said, Jerry, what about this and what about that? Well, you're right. But in terms of the stock market, unemployment, investment, and those kinds of things, and the fact that those predictions did not come true, that was a happy day. But now we have to look at the other side. I thought I'd give you a bit of a reprieve, but it's October now, and it's time to do yes, but. Okay, things are not that good. So we're going to drill down deeper, and I'm afraid you need to buckle up for this one. So get ready. So it starts with an article I wrote 2 years ago called When a Black Swan Flies Over a House of Cards. A black swan is an unpredictable event in economics. There are usually white swans, but a black swan is very rare. It happens once in a while. So it means some unpredicted dark event that occurred. And we thought that COVID-19 was the black swan that was going to fly over the house of cards and crush it and expose all of the weaknesses. Well, it doesn't seem like it did. And Anthony Fauci says we could be done with this pretty much by the middle of next year. So the idea was that America has many fragile points, and it is a house of cards. So if it's not COVID-19, it could be another black swan. Here we are going to talk about those things that make up the house of cards. Because it's not, the news here is not good. I wrote a book which is updated called Implosion. It's not about 9/11. It's about delusion, denial, and the prospect of collapse. I took two professors, Jared Diamond, a well-known anthropologist from UCLA, and he wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, which was a bestseller. But he also wrote a book called Collapse, on why societies collapse. And another person, Arnold Toynbee, a historian, wrote a book on that, on collapse, why societies crumble, Soviet Union, Ottoman Empire, Roman Empire. And I culled out 7 major factors that cause societies to collapse from those two guys. Okay? Natural disasters, for example. The Mayans were wiped out from a natural disaster, drought, and the Minoan civilization was wiped out from a natural disaster, a volcano. Empire gets overextended. The Ottoman Empire, the Soviet Union maybe, and certainly the Roman Empire got too big. So we're going to look at this as our report card, which I've done in the past. But now, the purpose of this video is to look at this report card for the United States during the pandemic. How do we score on these variables? Let's take a look, just to get you started. The first megatrend is natural disasters. During
the frequency of billion-dollar disasters has been rising in the past decade. 2020 has now set the bar even higher. A record-shattering 22 events were classified as billion-dollar disasters in 2020, blowing past the old record of 16 and affecting nearly every part of the country. These disasters spanned 4 categories, from drought and wildfires to an extreme number of severe weather outbreaks and hurricanes.
What really struck me is we had 7 separate billion-dollar tropical cyclones. The previous record was 4, which we had in 2004 and 2005. It's not typical to have a record number of billion-dollar tropical cyclones and a record number of billion-dollar severe storm events. That's just an anomaly. Hopefully that will not happen again.
The costliest event of the year was Major Hurricane Laura, a Category 4 storm that slammed into coastal Louisiana, doing more than $19 billion of damage. The relentless fall firestorms in the western United States were number 2, and rounding out the top 3, the August derecho, causing more than $11 billion in damage and becoming one of the costliest severe storm events in U.S. history.
All 22 of these events in total were $95 billion, which is the 4th highest inflation-adjusted cost year on record dating back to 1980.
Okay, now I've got another graph. This is from the National Oceanographic Association, and it lists the total cost of natural disasters in the United States. So look at these 2 points here. One is before the pandemic and one is during the pandemic. It increased 60%. So our score on this report card, on this factor, is no, it's not good. It's like a D. But, you know, $450 billion is not going to destroy America. We have a $22 trillion economy. So it's growing, but it's not a cause of the destruction of the United States. But still, our score for the last year is not great. Okay? Let's take a look at, those are your references there. Let's take a look at the next one, which is called Empire Gets Overextended. How do you measure that? See, I wanted to measure these things, quantify them. That's kind of what I do. So how do you measure empire overextended? Well, if you look at the total budget of the United States for military matters in blue, it's bigger than any other country in the world. You know that. Here, this is how many military bases or military personnel are stationed in Africa. The United States has about 1,000 overseas military bases. Russia has 1, maybe 2. China has 1. We have 1,000. So that's our empire. A majority of Americans do not believe we should have an empire, and they don't like the idea of the term empire in polls. Trump said he was going to cut back and end these endless wars, if you remember that, but he didn't really do that. This is Syria. Those are military bases. We built military bases in Syria. It's a legal country in the United Nations. They don't want us there. We're occupying their country, and we're building airports. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 U.S. military bases inside Syria when we're not. They didn't invite us in. So actually, we added, under the Trump administration, 25 new bases from Morocco to Qatar. Okay, and the rest was just fluff that is told to newspapers. So in effect, this variable, the extended empire, it actually increased 2% during the pandemic. We have natural disasters, not so good. Empire overextended, B minus. Disintegrating family. That's an element that is found as a symptom of collapsing societies. Well, how do you measure that? I was thinking of divorce rates, and then I thought, well, the better way to measure it would be you're really trying to talk about how society neglects or abuses children. So I used another variable to measure this, the percentage of children born to single mothers. Okay, so this is 2019, the number of American children who are being raised by one parent. Okay, that has increased by a factor of 3 since 1970. Now, population has not tripled since 1970. So that's not a very healthy statistic, that 40%, 42% of American children are not raised in a nuclear family. Now, a lot of people say, hey, being a single mom is a great thing. It's a great choice. It's awesome. Here are 31 reasons why it's awesome. So I looked at this and I was somewhat ambivalent. Then as I got into it, I realized those people at the top are kind of wealthy. All right. And to them, it is a choice and it's a lifestyle choice. But if you look at the entire demographic of single parent families, it's appalling. Okay, we're talking about a lot of poor people, a lot of poor women who have been abandoned. There are 3 million fathers in the United States who are delinquent in child support payments. Okay, so if you look at the demographics of the whole group, children from single parent families suffer more addictions, more abuse, are more alcoholic, graduate from high school less frequently, are 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, 14 times more likely to commit rape, and 30 times more likely to become homeless. This is a poorer population. Now, if you look at other countries, they have vast differences from our own. In China, 1% of children are raised in single-parent families. In Japan, it's 2%. In Greece, it's 9%. In America, it's 42%. This is really a sign of social pathology. So, one piece of good news is that during the pandemic, it declined 2%. I don't know why, but it declined. And that's a piece of good news. So we get a B plus on that on our report card. It's still a very negative sign about our society, but there was a slight improvement here. And we have to admit it. Okay? So, we're continuing and looking at our report card. How did we do during the pandemic? Another element is called perverse and bizarre entertainment. That's not a cause of collapse, but it is a symptom of a collapsing society. So I wanted to look at that. In the Roman Colosseum and in the last days of the Roman Empire, people were vicariously going to the Roman Colosseum and watching people slaughtered to death, and in competitions in which gladiators lost to lions. And this was a very popular event. Now we have, I want to take you on a guided fantasy. Imagine that you have there was a teacher in, this is a true story, it's not a guided fantasy. I'm leading up to that. True story. A teacher was teaching sex education in the 7th grade and showed the children a clinical, dry movie about masturbation. Fired. A high school teacher was teaching a high school class and showed a clip of 50 Shades of Grey. Fired. School systems have an obligation, they think, to protect children, and parent-teacher associations demand that. So, here's your guided fantasy. Imagine that you have a teacher who's teaching junior high, 7th grade, sex education, and he brings in a 13-year-old girl who got paid to have sex, who was a prostitute, who had sex with 3 different men and was paid for it. Okay? And the next day, this teacher invites another teenage girl to come to his class and say she got paid $500 to have sex. What's going to happen to that teacher? Okay, they're going to lose their credential, they're going to be fired, and that's the end of it. All right, so that's the guided fantasy. Now, when those children come home from school, they turn on television for the course from 1982 until 2010 or so. And they often got access to programs that were exactly like that. This is Maury Povich.
I got paid $60 to have sex with 3 guys at the same time.
There she is. Now, that sex education teacher could never do that in a school, but Maury does that. He did it almost on a daily basis.
Michelle's teen terror had sex in a church trying to get pregnant.
I got paid $500 just to have sex.
Now, you notice that Maury's kind of playing like a social worker. Oh, he's very shocked by all of this, and these girls have to go to boot camp. But he has them dress out in brasiers and come out and swear right into the camera. He's running a circus. He always has been. He's not a social worker. A social worker would never have their client come to a case conference wearing a brassiere. Caught on tape, my 8-year-old steals, smokes, and drinks. Maury Povich. So, an 8-year-old, I think, is in the 2nd grade, isn't it? First grade's 7 years old. 2nd grade, 8 years old. Can you imagine a 2nd grade teacher bringing in a child and showing those children this kid who steals, smokes, and drinks? I'm positive one of these 6 men is my baby's father. Teenage programs after school. My 14-year-old has a pimp. Should children be exposed to this? That's the question. Jerry Springer's been on for over 27 years. Maury Povich, I think, for 23 years. How many children were exposed to this kind of detritus?
We used to have sex 4 times a day, every day.
So this following is a video clip I did about the Jerry Springer show.
Here comes a little Jerry Springer. These are 2 midgets fighting over a love triangle. Think of this is like going to a circus and watching the bearded lady, these twins joined at the hip. It's degrading and it's a spectacle. Now look at the audience, at the Jerry Springer audience to your lower right. Okay, that's the Roman Colosseum. Okay, between 14 and 20 million people enjoy this kind of degrading entertainment. Okay, so 2 questions to ask here. When do societal norms kick in and say, this is not appropriate for elementary school children to watch? That's certainly one question. The second question is it a sign of social pathology if society fails to protect children for these kinds of inputs? And that's what we're kind of looking at. Now, this is 2 weeks ago. Children like to watch videos, music videos. These are the MTV Video Awards. But it's a performance. It is a vicarious acting out of something. 2 women are acting out a sexual episode on a crucifix, okay, in which one is bound, tied up. It's simulated rape, okay? So if you were Jewish and there was someone painted a swastika on a synagogue, that's a hate crime. Is this a hate crime? Having a homosexual rape acted out on a crucifix? Well, if it's not a rape, it's a sadomasochistic act, and it's a desecration of a religious symbol. But the issue that I want to raise is this. That's rated okay for 14-year-olds. 14-year-olds are in the 8th grade. Is that okay for an 8th grader growing up to assimilate, to deal with, to process? Imagine a Christian 8th grader looking at that and trying to somehow sort it all out in their developing sense of morality. I think there could be a very strong argument made that is not appropriate for that age group. Is it a sign of collapse when society does not protect its children?
31% of children in the United States over 11 have been exposed to hardcore pornography. There's another element that psychologists know about. It's called imitative learning or vicarious learning. You see a model, you identify with the model does things, gets reinforced, and you have a tendency to do that too. Children identify with animals, cartoon characters. If cartoon characters are acting out antisocial things, it increases the probability that
actor
the
and
children
regularly
themselves
goes
will
on
do.
benders, abuses various substances, and generally aims for rock bottom.
There was a movie called 13 Reasons Why recently about an adolescent who committed suicide. And here are the 13 reasons why that adolescent committed suicide. That show attracted adolescents, okay? And someone did a study on whether that movie increased adolescent suicide. Well, it increased it 13.3% for children who had watched it. It inspired it. It influenced children in a very negative way. So when we expose children to this kind of violent video, and the American Psychological Association says it has a connection with actual aggression. In 10 years, there were 180 school shootings in the United States. But during the pandemic, that went up to 612. So we're not doing well. All right, so I wanted to say, how do you measure perverse and bizarre entertainment? And I decided to use the metric, the sale of violent video games. Not video games, only violent video games. Did they increase or did they not?
Hatred. Now this game is an isometric shoot-'em-up video game released by Destructive Creations in 2015. This game follows the main character who's a misanthropic mass killer who's on a genocide crusade mission trying to kill as many people as he can. For what reason? There is none. Its trailer release alone back in 2014 had already garnered a lot of controversy, and by the time it was released it got severely negative reviews. The game pretty much has no message or moral whatsoever other than a slew of endless violence, and I don't get why someone would create a game full of that much death and destruction just because. Some of the pictures I saw of this game are so graphic and dark, I was just thinking to myself, I don't know who would play this happily. I mean, you're talking genocide for fun.
By the way, countries like the Netherlands, South Korea, New Zealand, Germany, Ireland, they do not allow this to be seen by children. Okay? There are certain standards which we don't seem to have. So in terms of the pandemic, violent video game sales increased 37%. Children are home, remote learning, bored, whatever. But it didn't go down, it went up a considerable amount. Okay, what else we have on our report card? The parasitic elite sucks out the lifeblood of a society, and the society says we can't take it anymore. All right? So if you look at the Tsar, I couldn't believe this. The Tsars of Russia, 1916, that guy had more wealth than Bill Gates today. He was worth $300 billion, while the Russian people were starving. And they said, okay, enough is enough. And the communist revolution took over. End of the Tsar's reign. Family slaughtered. This is Versailles, where Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI built this paradise for all the princes to govern France. And the French people said, okay, that's enough. And Marie Antoinette went before the guillotine. And we have the French Revolution.
Bring out
so
on the table
here's our
what
own
income
parasitic
and wealth inequality means to this country. Not vague terms. As a nation, are we satisfied with the reality that today the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%? Are we satisfied that in the last 4 decades there has been a massive shift of wealth from the middle class to the top 1%? Are we satisfied? And nobody talks about this. You have to talk about it. Are we satisfied that in America today, the 3 wealthiest people in this country, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett now own more wealth than the bottom half of America. That is 160 million people.
Okay, so he's making the point. Now, if you look at the graph of how much the top 1% have captured of the national wealth, it's way more than it was in 1929. Okay, this is a sign. This is a very negative sign. And during the pandemic, it actually increased 3.8% more. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer. This is a graph of, the crash of the markets and unemployment, lockdowns. But the red line shows that the top 1% made profits. Okay, together the total number of millionaires during the worst pandemic in American history, even now worse than the Spanish flu, a tragedy. More people died than in any war except the Civil War. But the number of millionaires doubled. People got rich during this. Okay, that's a bad sign. Bad sign. So the question next is, an ancillary question is, are we really living in a democracy or a plutocracy? Nancy Pelosi is worth $120 million net worth, according to some sources, which means she's 1,200 times wealthier than her constituents, the average constituent. Dianne Feinstein is allegedly worth over 87 million. Net worth of Michael Bloomberg is 56 billion. He wanted to be president. Net worth of Trump, 3 billion. Mitch McConnell, 20 million. We're talking about multimillionaires here who govern our country. This is, speaking of Versailles, this is Nancy Pelosi's vineyard that she owns in Northern California. And this, according to a real estate magazine, is her home, which they say is the most expensive home in San Francisco. This is Dianne Feinstein's home in San Francisco. This is Kelly Loeffler's home. She's worth $500 million. This is Mitch McConnell's plantation. And this is not Versailles. You'll have to guess what it is. It's Donald Trump's apartment. Okay, so half of all U.S. senators are millionaires. 20 millionaires represent the people of California. 70 millionaires represent the Florida House and Senate. I think the proper word for this is not democracy, plutocracy. The 1% have their people running this show. The greater the concentration of wealth in the top echelon, the closer it is to collapse. And we're certainly reaching that tipping point, are we not? By the way, that's Bernie Sanders' house. Kind of modest. So let's see how we're doing. We didn't do well on that last one on our report card. Next one is called external or internal violence. And so I saw this statistic. I couldn't believe that it was true. But it came from CNN. Half of all U.S. adults have an immediate family member who has been in jail or prison. Well, I thought this is not true, but I think my brother was arrested for drunk driving when he was 28 years old. So I guess that would include me. But I think it's an outrageous statistic anyway. I just cannot accept it. However, if you look at mass shootings during the pandemic, you can see that they increased. So that's not a very good score for us. But, up until now, this has been a very good thing. Despite what you read in newspapers, the number of murders in the United States has been declining since 1995. Down, 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 down. And then suddenly, in the last few years, it has turned around. And during the pandemic, homicides in the United States increased 25%. So we've got another dark grade on our report card. So there's one last one to talk about, and that is called debt. All right. That has destroyed many societies in the past, and is it going to destroy our society? The debt bomb. Well, there's good news, partially, and that is that Americans did increase their credit card debt since 2010, way too much, but they got stimulus checks and they paid down their credit card debt during the pandemic. So it declined 17%. Hey, we get a higher grade for this. Oh, but wait a minute. There are other kinds of debt. This is student debt here. And I just hate to say it, but during the pandemic, student loan debt increased 12%. Auto loan debt didn't come down. It went up and continues to go up. It went up 6% during the pandemic. Our grades are not doing too well. Corporate debt went up during the pandemic, continues to go up. It went up 6.25% since the pandemic. And public debt, government debt, outrageous. It grew 22% during the pandemic. So if we look at our report card, during this crisis, it doesn't really look that great. So that's the bad news that I have to bring to you. I created a thing called the Dystopia Index. I worked with a statistician. I'm also a person who teaches. I used to teach research at a graduate level. And I asked this guy, can you make a single metric of all these 7 factors and scale everything into one metric? So that yellow line are those 7 things. The green line is population. You can see that up through 1990, we were doing pretty well. Okay, the number of children raised in single-parent families was not so bad. The military-industrial complex had not expanded that much. And then in around 1990, things just got worse. Debt got worse. Single-parent families got worse. Maury Povich got on TV more. Okay, and so I thought I'd bring this up to date. And before, when I did that first presentation, before the pandemic, I recalculated everything. And between 2015 and 2019, it grew another 23%. Now, people say, Jerry, you got too much statistics. So let's try a different metaphor. Let's say that's this guy's health chart. Those are his vital signs: cholesterol, how much he drinks, how much he smokes, what is glucose metabolism, all the 7 factors that are related to his survival as a human being. Okay? Well, that's his medical chart. The green line is what's normal. So this guy is what you would call at risk. That's the point we're trying to make. Our country is at risk. So I was on a radio show with some guy called me up and asked me to be on a radio show. He interviewed me. He said, I talked to Jared Diamond last week. Jared Diamond is the professor who wrote the book Collapse. He said, I asked Jared Diamond, how many years before America collapses? And Jared Diamond said about 10. Now, I don't know if Jared Diamond actually said that. That's what the radio announcer said to me. So he asked me the same question, how many years before America collapses? And I said, I have no idea. All I know is it's at risk, but I have no idea when to call it. So when is that guy going to die? When is that guy going to have a heart attack? Who knows? No doctor is going to say, oh, but is he going to have 10 years to live at that rate? So here is now recalculation now. How did we do during the pandemic? Get ready. Those factors we just reviewed, this is the score, all right? And I'm sorry to say that those 7 factors increased 18% during the pandemic. We didn't get better. We didn't collapse. We didn't have a depression, okay? All those pundits were wrong, but look at that. That's the deeper picture some of you wrote to me about. You wanted to know. What's the deeper picture? Well, that deeper picture is not very encouraging. We are reaching a tipping point. And our house of cards is really, really fragile. Now, so even if our black swan, the COVID-19, flies away and it didn't cause a Great Depression, all of the financial systems, so that the markets are up and people are going back to work, and that's good. The fact is, another black swan could come, another variant, another thing, but the house of cards is really, really fragile, and more fragile than it was. All right. So my next question that I think is all relevant is, can we change? Can we reform? Can we do anything? Certainly, if you go to Oprah Winfrey's show, you see people like that. They reform. They go on diets. They change their lives. You see them say, I'm so glad I found the keto diet or whatever, and I've changed my life. And I brought the yellow line down. Now, there was a comedian named Dick Gregory, pretty funny political comedian, and he had a hobby, and his hobby was to help severely obese people lose weight. I don't know why he did that. I don't think he was ever obese. Maybe he was. I don't know that much about him, but I know that he was very good at what he did. He would spend 2 or 3 years with a person and help them lose 300 pounds. Okay, he did a good job. Now, I wrote a book called Implosion, talking about collapse and how do we bring that yellow line down? Well, the first factor is natural disasters. What can we do about that? Well, we could do something. We could deal with global warming. We need to build a solar and wind infrastructure. We need to cut emissions 50% in a few years. We're not doing much. We're doing a little. And even if we did all of that, it's going to be years before natural disasters start coming down. Our curve is still up. So we have to do something, but seeing the results of that is not going to be immediate at all. I wrote a book on climate change and made a very severe video on it, and then things have just gotten worse, and I made another video called Climate Emergency, and we're really, really close to being at a tipping point. There's not much we can do about natural disasters immediately to push this line down. So factor 2, the overextended empire, we could do something about that. What would happen if we slashed defense spending 50%? And if we see, these are American military bases in the world, all the pink countries. We have our 1,000 military bases in our empire. Okay, we have a military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean that is 1,000 miles from any landmass. Okay, we have 7 military bases in Romania. Do you know where Romania is? It is on the Black Sea. Okay, we have Air Force personnel there. So what if we reduced our overseas bases by half and cut our defense spending by half? So what would happen is I decided to make a calculation of what would it look like if we did that? I mean, that's kind of an outrageous thing, but what would this graph look like? I'm superimposing one on the other, all right? And if you cut half the bases and reduce defense spending, that is what it would look like. It wouldn't change it very much, okay? It's going to take a lot more than that. It's like this guy says, okay, I'm cutting my drinking down by 50%. Well, that's great. Are you also dealing with your diet? No. Are you going to exercise more? No. Are you improving your relationship with your family? No. Are you smoking still? Yes. So he's just doing one thing. He's cutting his drinking down by half. Well, if we just did one thing and cut our defense spending by half, that's the yellow line. It's still way out of what it should be. Okay? Doesn't change things that much. There are 7 factors here. There's much more work to do. So, what do you do about the disintegrating family? This is something we could do rather rapidly by making changes in policy. For example, the American Association of Marriage Counselors says that if you required people to get 4 to 6 weeks of marriage counseling before they were allowed to get a divorce, that would reduce divorce by about 65%. And, by the way, Denmark and Australia already do that. Okay. If you enforced child support payments better, that could also reduce divorce rates by 5.2%. So there are things we could do to help single-parent households raising 40% of American children. What do we do about perverse entertainment? Well, the answer is we need to censor the internet and censor the media from violence and pornography to protect children. Sorry, that sounds awfully right-wing, doesn't it? Well, that's the idea. Here was the media that existed before the surge, okay? This is the way the media looked when that yellow line was down there, okay? These are the programs that children saw, okay? Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Rogers, okay? The Waltons, Happy Families. Here's I Love Lucy, Happy Days. These were wholesome, G-rated programs. They were not. And here's what the media looks like after the surge. Violence, violence, more violence. How many children have seen that character and his portrayal?
Thus, many gruesome deaths occur, with the relatively innocent Morty even going on a killing spree of his own at one point. Man, that kid must need a lot of therapy. Nobody is safe in the madcap universe of Rick and Morty, not even Mr. Poopy Butthole.
And of course, there's Jerry Springer interviewing a stripper for afternoon audiences. So, if you censor the internet and TV for children, it would push down that yellow line just a little bit. What do we do about the parasitic elite? Okay, let's take a look. What could be done? Well, the top 1% in the United States holds $21 trillion in assets. A 20% tax on their net worth, a wealth tax, would generate $4 trillion in revenue. Now, believe it or not, Trump, before he became president, was asked, what would happen if you had to pay a tax of 15% on your net worth? And he said, well, I'd still have $800 million. I could live on that. Okay, so a wealth tax would produce a lot of results. That $4 trillion could eliminate all student debt. It would provide housing vouchers for all of Americans homeless. It would bail out 16 bankrupt cities. It could help relieve pension underfunding. Okay, it would cut the top 1% off at the knees and make it look more like Japan and France and their top 1% and what percentage of wealth they hold. Okay. And what do you do about the plutocracy and a government run by multimillionaires? Well, what if you had, now we're pretending, I admit we're pretending, how to reform this. What if there was a law that said no one can hold elective office who has more than $10 million? If Jeff Bezos wants to be a senator, he's got to divest himself of everything except his last 10 million. And he could live on his 10 million. Otherwise, you can't be a senator or congressman. Well, that would mean that we would get rid of 48 members of Congress and the Senate. If you got more than 10 million, bye-bye Nancy Pelosi, bye-bye Chuck Schumer, off you go. You've got too much money for us. So the average senator earns about $174,000 a year. That's $3,600 a week. You can live on that. Okay, and no more special interests. I mean, there are lobbyists who contribute $3.4 billion a year to lobby our 500 or so senators and congressmen. That comes out to be $6 million for every congressman and senator that is spent on them to get them to support their causes. If that was eliminated and said, no, senators and congressmen represent the American people.
Right now, our current contribution limit from any person to a candidate is $2,700. Now, that's a lot of money. you know, and that can certainly buy some gratitude with the lawmaker. But if you really want to add punch to that type of buying of favors, what you do is you get 50 or 100 people together at an event like this, all chipping in $2,700, and then you bundle it all together and hand over the total amount to the lawmaker. At that point, we're talking anywhere up to $250,000. So suddenly you've got a group of people with the same demand they want from the lawmaker handing over $250,000. That buys a lawmaker.
So all that would end. There would be no outside income allowed, no insider trading allowed, no bribery, no soft money, no trips, no favors, no dinners. You represent the American people. It's called a democracy. This guy is talking, and it looks like he's talking to the Congress and to the Senate. But this is what Americans don't see. He's not talking to anybody. Okay? They don't show you that. The representatives of the people are missing. This is Bernie Sanders
today being driven
talking
off of their land
that's
are
what
not
you
going
see.
to win this war, nor will the children or the elderly.
Okay, this is what
I
actually
fear
happened.
very much
Same speech.
that what we said yesterday
Nobody
is
there.
that war and the enormous destructive power of our armed forces is our preferred manner for dealing.
Okay, so if we're going to reform our parasitic elite and our plutocracy, we're going to make a few changes. A 20% wealth tax on the net worth of people in the top 1%. A new law, no one can hold elective office in the United States who has a net worth more than $10 billion. Boy, that would clean out a lot of cobwebs. And as long as we're at it, attendance is required. And if you don't show up, you lose your seat, just like in elementary school. Those are some suggestions. All right, we have one last one, very serious. Debt and a debased currency. What do we do about $27 trillion in debt? Not a simple solution. First of all, we have to admit it. It's a deeply complex problem. One suggestion is to monetize the debt with precious metals. That would stop the government from printing money. Another important and controversial recommendation is to audit and nationalize the Federal Reserve. No one knows how much money they print. They've always resisted being audited. We only have underground publications who tell us things like this one says the Fed printed $16 trillion. This one says they printed $1 trillion a day. This one says they printed $19 trillion in 2020. Another says they printed money and gave it to foreign countries to bail out their banks. We don't know the answer. Okay, we simply do not know if these publications are right, and we need to have that information. After all, it's our currency. Okay, so here we are with our guy. We know that reform is possible. He could bring this yellow line down with changes. What are we looking at here? We're looking at massive construction of solar and wind infrastructure, cutting emissions 50%, slashing defense spending 50%, closing 500 overseas bases, mandatory marriage counseling for people getting divorced, censoring the internet and TV, eliminating multimillionaires from government and a wealth tax on the 1%, monetizing the debt and auditing the Federal Reserve. Way too extreme. Who would ever support it? Are you kidding me? Okay, the things that need to be done to bring that yellow line down are supported by virtually no one. Maybe AOC, maybe Bernie a little bit. Okay, but this man, let's say the doctor says, listen, sir, if you want to live beyond 10 years, you need to stop smoking, stop drinking, improve your relationships, start exercising, eliminate sweets. You have to do all those things. And the answer is that in our political climate, there's no one who stands for representing more than one or two of those things. Now, Carl Jung, my mentor, psychologist, said, that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. that which we do not confront in ourselves, we will meet as fate. Which means if you don't do it, even though you know you should, it's going to happen to you. Okay? So this man, if he ignores the writing on the wall and he ignores his doctor's advice and doesn't do it, something is going to happen to him which is called fate. And it's going to push that yellow down. If it doesn't kill him, he'll have a heart attack, he'll develop cancer, he'll lose 80 pounds, his wife will leave him, he'll have a car accident. Something will happen that forces that yellow line down, okay? Independently of his rational ego. So all we know is, from our analysis, is that during the pandemic, these risk factors increased 18%. Things just got worse. Even though we didn't have a depression, we can thank God that we didn't. But we can't sit back and say, oh my God, we're doing so well. We really can't. And if you look at a lot of other statistics that are not part of these two professors and their books on collapse, and you just collect some random statistics, we're not in good shape. The United States has the second highest number of prisoners. These are red flags. We have the highest rate of illegal drug use in the world. We have the highest rate of opiate overdose in the world. We have the highest percentage of obese people in the world. Out of 191 countries, we're third in divorce. We rank fourth in auto theft in the world. The fourth highest rate of rape in the world. We produce 89% of the pornography in the world. The highest percentage of government debt in the world, 31% of all the world's debt, is held by us. Second place is held by Japan. Here are your references for those statistics. So, two conclusions. Yes, indeed, we dodged a bullet, it seems, and we didn't have a global collapse, and 23 experts, including me, were wrong, and the world did not come to an end between September 2020 and September 21st. So the black swan seems to have passed us by, and we seem to have survived it. But the second part of that is, no, we are not in good shape. We're worse off than we were before, weaker, more vulnerable, less prepared for the next black swan event or the next variant or whatever is coming. Because it isn't. So the deeper conclusion is this: it isn't just one thing. It isn't the fact that we have more tornadoes and hurricanes and droughts, severe weather events, and climate change. Big issue, but that's not the single factor here. It's not the fact that our military keeps asking for more money, building more bases, expanding into Africa and even into outer space. Our empire keeps growing. It isn't that. It isn't the fact that 40% of American children are being raised by one parent. It isn't that. It isn't the fact that we think it's okay for 14-year-old 8th graders to watch an MTV video show of two women, one woman raping another woman on a crucifix to music as a vicarious entertainment event, and that children who are 14 should be able to deal with that and process that in their developing sense of values. We shouldn't, but that's not the only factor. And during the worst pandemic in American history, even bigger now than the Spanish flu, we have twice the number of millionaires. People have gotten rich during this tragedy where 660,000 Americans died. There were people who got rich, and that doesn't seem to disturb us. And that factor, along with the fact that homicides have increased over 20% just during this pandemic in Chicago and Minneapolis and Detroit, New York, St. Louis, and the fact that we are borrowing more to buy automobiles, borrowing more to run our corporations, borrowing more to give people stimulus checks. All of those factors individually are not the issue. The fact is they all together create a gigantic ball of social pathology. And that ball got 18% bigger, 18% heavier, 18% worse during the pandemic. That's the point of this video. Okay, we are at risk of collapse, and I'm not smart enough to know what kind of form that takes. Is it the form of a Great Depression, which many people suggest it is? Is it the form of revolution, a Bernie kind of revolution, or a communist takeover like we had in Russia or the French Revolution? Is that the variety of collapse that we're going to experience? Is it a failed state like Zimbabwe, or is it hyperinflation? We don't know the answer to that. But these two authors and those statistics say you're at risk. So we don't know if that guy is going to die of a heart attack or cancer or have a car accident. All we know is that man who's eating that sandwich is really at risk. And that's what the point of this is. Without real reform, it is not encouraging. So that's all of this stuff comes from that book. And I thank you for getting this far, and I appreciate your time and attention. Take care and good luck.